my ever continuing attempt to dissect mystery religions and to make the information available publicly in a modern format. Today, I'm going to be discussing Nabu or Mercury or Hermes or whatever name you want to call this figure by, the prophetic son of God, so to speak, and going over some of the etymological connections to the Tower of Borsippa, the Tower of Babylon, and so on and so forth. It's going to be a little bit of a long read, and it's going to be rather in depth, but I put this stuff out there not for mass audience consumption. I put it out there for the individuals that are genuinely interested in this type of stuff. So hopefully someday, the people that already have seen it and the people that would like to see it get access to this type of stuff. So this is going to be regarding the title. This initial part is going to be regarding the title Patishi, which directly connects into its highly Masonic terminology. I'm sure this individual, especially given the fact that he wrote this in the 19th century, must have been interconnected with these mystery rites to know this much. But this connects into the sublime, or the 32nd degree, the Scottish rite, which they call the sublime prince of the royal secret, or even just the 3rd degree, which would be the sublime degree of Master Mason within the Blue Lodge. It's kind of funny because they always say these things like the final degree of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, this is the 32nd degree. And then over here, they'll have some dude like, the 3rd or Master Mason degree is referred to as the sublime degree. It's called sublime because in the archaic, whatever. The Master Mason degree is the highest degree in Masonry, the conclusion of the Masonic journey. So, part master of Masonic Lodge of Research, either he's been stuck in the Blue Lodge his entire life, which happens quite often, or he's just lying their asses off. Because what you're going to come to find is that these people, these organizations, are notorious liars. We all know they have a 33rd degree after the 32nd. And then if you go to the Memphis Mizraim Rite, right, you just have to know where to look. Right, the Memphis Mizraim Rite, after you make it past the 33rd, with the first 33 being common to the Scottish Rite, Memphis Mizraim has at least 99 degrees. At least 99. I've heard elsewhere that it goes up to 365, which I wouldn't be surprised, right? Because that's the whole thing. So, anyway, yeah, these people are notorious liars. I know I'm getting kind of sidetracked, but this is how you end up with this type of shit, right? Because these are the individuals that run these types of organizations. This is NASA, right? National Aeronautics Space Administration, Washington, D.C., Field Resonance Propulsion Concept. I'm not the only one who's seen this. I think it's started to pop up more often in mainstream. I've seen at least one other video talking about it, but this is from 1979. Field Resonance Propulsion Concept, complete fucking nonsense. Complete science fiction. UFO. Right, they plant these little pieces. This is like an official patent. National Aeronautics Space Administration, Field Resonance Propulsion Concept, yada yada yada. And right, they plant these organizations. They plant these little pieces of disinformation and that are integral to the overall psychological operations that they perpetuate, right? The speculative propulsion concept described in this paper was presented at a special session of the 15th Joint yada yada yada. NASA is not involved in UFO research. However, the research which may be stimulated by this paper could result in the verification of the essential elements of this concept and in feasibility studies concerning the development of a new generation of NASA spacecraft. The field resonance propulsion concept has been developed utilizing recent research into the causes of solar flares, magnetic substorms, black holes, science fiction, quasars, and UFOs. The concept is based on two assumptions. Space-time is a projection of a higher dimensional space in much the same way that a hologram is a projection. Okay, there's that hologram bullshit. UFO research. UFO studies indicate that the unexplained residual UFO phenomena may be due to extraterrestrial visitors, parapsychological experiences, or a combination of the two. If some UFO phenomena are caused by extraterrestrial visitors and very advanced spacecraft, and the frequency of visits in a large number of different types, as you can see here, it's a large pile of UFO fucking propaganda, and this is exactly how they operate, is that they plant all of this shit all over the place as if it's an accident, that there's just some random NASA fucking PDF from their official, it's even got the official logo on it, for Christ's sake, nasa.gov, and they just put this shit out there for the public, talking about UFOs. Okay, but anyway, that's really the reason that I study all of this shit, is to understand why these types of things occur, who it is that runs this type of shit, so on and so forth. So, getting back to the character of Mercury generally and the Cabiri. Alright, chapter 3, the Cabiri. Section 29. In the legend upon the signet cylinder of Lik-Bagas. For we prefer this reading to that of Uruk, who heads the list of ancient Chaldean kings, so far as known. This monarch assumes the title of Patishi, an expression often occurring in the cuneiform text, having the sense of master, pontiff, sovereign pontiff, or priest-king. Lik-Bagas was literally a priest-king, like Melchizedek, who was a king of Salem, and at the same time a priest of El Elyon, or the Most High God. Abraham must have recognized at once the exalted character of Melchizedek, for he was born in Ur of the Chaldees, which was the chief capital of Lik-Bagas, and the order of priest-kings was well known at Babylon. At the earliest period of which the inscriptions afford us any knowledge, the country of Assyria also was governed by sovereign pontiffs, or Patishi, though they seem to have been tributary to Chaldea or Babylon. The term Patishi, for which Assyriologues often substitute the reading Patisi, must be regarded as a technical expression, designating a class of personages universally recognized, and in whom the kingly and sacerdotal characters were united. Coming down to the era of Nebuchadnezzar, we find that this monarch applies to the god Marduk, the patron divinity of Babylon. The phrase Patishi, Tisri, and Nebuchadnezzar himself frequently assumes the same title, from which it appears that the locution was employed in reference equally to certain deities and to men in high official stations. But it is, I think, satisfactorily shown from the critical investigations of Reverend Archibald Sashi and M. Griville that the god Marduk, whose name frequently appears in the inscriptions under the Akkadian form Amerud, was in point of fact no other than the biblical Nimrod, Cushite founder of the primitive Babylonian kingdom, although Mr. George Smith in his recently published work objects to this view. He urges that the god Marduk was regarded as creator of the world, like the Babylonian Bel or Belus, and could not have been at first merely a deified mortal. The author forgets, however, that Bel as creator and Marduk as patron deity of Babylon were originally two distinct personages, whose characters were blended only at an epoch much later, as long since established by Sir H. Rawlinson, and more recently by M. Lenormand. The philological and other evidences adduced by M. Griville and Reverend Archibald Sashi should be regarded as conclusive, as it appears to me, until proofs of an equally critical character are discovered, tending to destroy their force. But to return, it is obvious that the entire phrase Patishi Tisri was employed technically. Also, the same as Patishi when used alone. As the latter designated the entire class of sovereign pontiffs, the former must have been limited in its application to those of a high rank. In this sense, it is probable that we should interpret the full phrase when assumed by Nebuchadnezzar as his own title, and likewise when bestowed upon the god Marduk, shown to have been one with Nimrod. The connection of Nimrod with the temple structures of Babylon and Borsippa, to which the inscription of Nebuchadnezzar just cited largely relates, was fully established in the first chapter. It will be interesting, then, to study briefly the particular notions inherent in the two expressions Patishi and Patishi Tisri, assumed as official titles by the ancient rulers of the country of the Euphrates. I apologize for all of the thumping that I'm sure will show up. It seems that every fucking time I try to record something, this motherfucker starts stomping around. So I don't know what to do about it. I apologize. We have first the sign Pa, explained by Imla Normand as follows: to anoint, royal unction, power. Also cat and coon. The rising day, the dawn. Then follows T, foundation, base, duration, etc., with the Assyrian value of cornerstone. The third character is She, horn, to strike with the horn, blow, side, to accomplish, to fill. Of the term Tisri, the first element has the sense of to see, view, appearance, to rise as a star. The sign Re, column, etc., is already familiar to the reader. A very frequent monogram for the god Nabu, assimilated to the planet Mercury, being thus the same as the Egyptian Thoth and the Greek Hermes, was the Akkadian Pa, designating him as the patron of religious and civil institutions, as he who anoints both king and priest, bestowing upon them the divine unction and power. The same symbol in the sense of opening day, the dawn, refers to Mercury as morning star, as he who foretells the sunrise. In this phase of his character, Nabu is the instructor and prophet par excellence. Accordingly, one of his titles is Dun Pa Udo, peaceful prophet of the rising sun. The Akkadian T, Assyrian Timon, is particularly employed with reference to constructions, especially of a sacred character, as temples or towers, and denotes the base, the foundation, the cornerstone. But it is necessary always to bear in mind that at Babylon, and generally throughout the country of the Euphrates, the materials for such structures were rather brick than stone, hence the language of Genesis, and they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. The great tower at Babylon is termed by Nebuchadnezzar the temple of the foundation, T of the earth. The element She or Si was highly symbolical, the same as the two characters just explained. The horns of the Taurus and buffalo were types of strength and impetuosity. Then there was the horn of the altar, of the ship, the crescent, finally the horn of the tower and of the sacred mountain. In a hymn to Marduk, the tower at Babylon is termed the horn of the habitation, alluding to the upper sanctuary. And in another hymn, to the great mountain of Bel, the scribe speaks of its horn as a ray of the luminous sun, as the star of heaven that announces the day completing its effulgence. The mountain peak catches the first beams of the sun and thus foretells the approaching light, the same as the morning star. In the term Tisri, there is also a latent symbolism, since the first element relates to the appearance, rising of a star, while Re, column, also rising of a star, has frequent reference to Venus, Babylonian Ishtar. All the indications, then, inherent in the characters composing the two expressions being studied, seem to direct the mind towards the east, as the region where the great rising takes place, from whence the light approaches, that region where wisdom was first revealed and the first foundations laid. That which completes the view is the fact that the entire phrase Patishi Tisri is explained by Dr. Schrader as a sublime master. I have already insisted upon the idea that the expression here referred to is not simply laudatory in general, but technical, and this results not only from what has been before stated, but from the assimilation of the term Patishi by Dr. Schrader, in the place just cited, to the Hebrew Patish, hammer, a well-known symbol of the Kabiri, whose mysteries were celebrated throughout antiquity. In fact, a term denoting the hammer was the name of one of the chief Cabiriac divinities. A still further confirmation of our view here, amounting almost to a demonstration, is found in the term Patisi, habitual designation of the pygmy images of the Kabiri. Much doubt has existed as to the true etymology of the word Patisi, but Dr. Movers is probably correct in deriving it from the Greek patasso, to beat, to pound, to knock, from whence patisi, a hammer. The sense of patasso, to pound, to knock, answers precisely to that of She or Si, horn, to strike with the horn, blow, etc. We assume without hesitation, then, the original identity of the two terms patishi and patisi. as denoting primarily a hammer, and thence as symbolical designation of the Cabiri, the reputed sovereign pontiffs or priest kings like those of the valley of the Euphrates. We have first their exact phonetical equivalents. The reading patisi, often adopted by cuneiform scholars, can hardly be distinguished from patisi, so frequently applied to the Cabiriac images. The assimilation of patishi by Dr. Schrader to the Hebrew patish, hammer, accords perfectly with Dr. Mover's derivation of patisi from patasso, denoting thus a hammer. Both terms were unquestionably employed with reference to a priest class in whom the civil and sacerdotal functions were united. The data thus briefly presented must go far to establish the conclusion not only that the priest kings of the Chaldeo-Assyrian Empire were Cabiri, technically so designated by the term Patishi so often applied to them, but that the chief builders of the Tower of Babel, identified with that of Borsippa, were also Cabiri, among whom the Kushite hero Nimrod, under the title of Patishi Tisri, was recognized as sublime master. It will be necessary now to call to attention to the third group of characters, extending from A to G as exhibited in the first plate. The couplet marked A shows the Akkadian tag to extend, to depose in layers, a layer of brick, to prepare, to complete, sentence, augury, tack, being fear. It will be seen that the hieratic form of the next couplet is only a variant of the one just explained, and it has actually the same phonetic power, tag signifying a stone. It is probable that the same original symbol, denoting a stone, was slightly modified at a subsequent period when brick were substituted for stone in the Euphrates Valley, in order to designate this new material used for the same purpose. In the third character, we find the two forms of T, Assyrian Timon, foundation, cornerstone, etc., as set forth in the previous section. The similarity in form so apparent in these three signs is strictly paralleled by the direct analogy existing between the conceptions involved in them. The triplet marked D, and D is an important one with the value ak, to make, to labor, to build, to superintend, to create. Then follows the composite sign E, whose value is akka, to elevate, to exalt, to sustain, to favor, to delight in, having the Assyrian reading ram with the same sense. The two sets of parallel lines marked F, or is that one of those fancy S's? Yeah, I think that's S. The two sets of parallel lines marked S belong to the Egyptian system of writing with the phonetic power of Sassoon signifying 8. In the couplet G, concluding the group, affords two examples of the 8 kuas, or the 8 quas, so called, constituting a primitive mode of Chinese writing. And this is like the eight trigrams, is that what it's called? Yeah, that's what he's referring to here. So he's connecting 8 to all of these different languages etymologically. Because if you've seen, right, the other things I talk about, we're talking about the 8th Kabiri here. So I know it's very in depth, but affords two examples from the 8 kuas, so called, constituting a primitive mode of Chinese writing. The forms marked F and G will be more fully explained in their proper connection. The Akkadian tag, stone, must have been a very primitive word for mountain, characteristically the region of stone. And this term occurs frequently in the names of mountains in Central Asia, as for example the Beller tag. The two forms tag and tack are only variants of each other, the sounds K and G constantly interchanging in the inscriptions. The form tack is obviously the primary one, both being compound syllables, which may be resolved into either taka or ta'ak. And instances might be cited where tack is written phonetically according to both methods, but ta'ak alone affords us an intelligent etymology of the word. The element ak signifies to make or to build, and tak denotes the material for constructions, whether brick or stone. The term aka is found very frequently preceded by the determinative of locality, as ki aka, place, exalted, that is, sanctuary, temple. For this reason, it may be inferred that ak, to build, etc., not only helps to form the word tak, material for building, but ki akka, the building itself. According to the opinion of M. Lenormand, akka forms the ground element in the name akkad. Thus, akka, to elevate, and aku, very high, supreme, conduct to akkad, elevated, mountainous country, from which the author infers that the Acadians were originally mountaineers, highlanders. As already suggested, the term tag or tak, the same as akkad, must have denoted primitively a mountain, as in the name Bellard Tag, so that the fundamental relation of all these words with the element ak for their common base is a matter in relation to which not much doubt can be entertained. The sign ak constitutes another monogram for Nabu, the Babylonian Mercury, in its sense of to make, to build, to create, shows that originally Mercury attached to himself a definite cosmical character among the Babylonians, the same as with the Egyptians. It is necessary to connect with this Akkadian or Kushite symbol the two sets of parallel lines marked S and appertaining to the Egyptian writing. In an excellent and critical treatise on the gnomes of Egypt, Jacques de Rogue has the following in reference to Hermopolites. The ancient gnome was Un, chief place Sassoon, later Hermopolis. The term Sassoon in the Egyptian language designates the numeral 8. This number relates to the 8 gods who assisted Thoth, Mercury, in his character as creator of the world. Thoth, the god of intelligence, the inventor of writing, compared by the Greeks to Hermes, had his principal cultist in the city of Sassoon. If now we compare the Akkadian Ak with the Egyptian Sassoon, it will be seen at once that a direct relation exists between them, not only in respect to the form of the two paleographic symbols, but also as regards the conceptions attached to them. First, and with reference to the form of the two characters, the two sets of parallel lines, 4 in each, giving rise to the conception of 8, is very prominent in both examples. In the cuneiform sign, we have a middle equatorial line, answering to the primary division of the cosmos, while the same idea is expressed in the Egyptian character by the two distinct groups of lines. The cuneiform symbol is sometimes constructed with 4 squares above and 4 below this middle line, showing that the reduplication of 4 into 8 is fundamental in the conception of this figure, and that it must have appertained originally to it the same as to the Sassoon of the Egyptian writing. Secondly, and as regards the notions attached to these figures, both are connected with the god Mercury under the various names of Nabu, Thoth, Hermes, and in both cases the notion of fabricating, building, creating is fundamental. As the Egyptian Sassoon definitely related to the cosmical character of Mercury, there can be no doubt of a similar reference involved in the Akkadian Ak, taken as a monogram of this divinity. A comparison of the two symbols demonstrates, it seems to me, not only a common origin of the characters themselves, but of the ideas associated with them. With the two figures just studied, it is necessary to connect the specimens of Chinese writing marked G in our group. It is remarkable that the same numeral 8 reappears here, and that one moment. And that the fundamental reference is to the cosmos, the creation of the world. The basis of the Chinese characters is the continuous line denoting unity, and of the broken line symbol of duality, as generated from the primal unit. The 2 then give birth to 4, and the 4 to 8. In the Yi King, we have the following statement of the cosmical doctrines attached to these symbols. The Great Summit engenders the two principles engendering the four forms, and the four forms producing the 8 kuas. It should be remarked that the number 8 is not represented in any character, as in the Egyptian Sassoon, but by 8 distinct groups of parallel lines variously arranged and derived from the two fundamental principles. But this number is just as prominent, nevertheless, and the reference to the cosmos is undoubted, so that the Akkadian Ak, Egyptian Sassoon, and Chinese Kuas exhibit at a glance their direct relation to each other, both in form and in the ideas attached to them. They may be traced respectively to the earliest historical period of the populations employing them, showing that they were not derived the one from the other, but had a common origin, probably outside the countries occupied subsequently by these nationalities. From the Kushites of Chaldea, the Hamites of Egypt, and the Turanians of China, we passed to the Aryans of Central Asia, and the races diverging from this common center. The Aryan radical Ak, to penetrate, to pierce, to enter with force, to reach, etc., constitutes the theme of a multitude of words under different forms, some of them obviously related to our subject. First, akana, stone, whetstone, from which is the Sanskrit asna, stone, sling stone, together with various other Aryan words denoting implements obviously made of stone, such as the spear or javelin, or anything sharp-pointed. The forms aku, sharp, pointed, summit, peak, evidently of a mountain, akra, sharp point and akri, angle corner like that of a cornerstone. Akman, stone, in heaven, the Sanskrit form denotes a stone, while that of the Zend signifies heaven. To the same name belongs the Greek Akmon or Akman, father of Uranus, also anvil. The Greek Akman, anvil, was another name applied to one of the chief Cabiri, to be compared with the Hebrew patish, hammer, fourth, Akten, 8, and Oktama, the 8th, to which belong the Greek and Latin octo and octo, meaning 8. The derivation here shown of the Aryan word for the numeral 8 is quite important, and it merits particular attention. From its theme ak, to pierce, to penetrate, together with its cognates such as akana, stone, akra, sharp point, and akri, corner, angle, it is plain that the material object constituting the basis of the notion of 8 in this case is no other than a stone, with its sharp angles and corners, but it is necessary to conceive a definite and limited number of these angles or corners corresponding to the numeral itself. In a word, a dressed stone with 8 corners, having thus a cubical or oblong form, constituted the original symbol of the notion involved in Akten, the Aryan numeral 8. But I wish to add here another radical from the same family of tongues, together with some of its derived forms. The root tak, varied to tax, signifies to hew, to make, to work, etc. It is obvious that the material to be hewed or wrought upon might be either wood or stone, though the derivatives contemplate for the most part only wood as the material. First, taksan or takshan, worker in wood, hewer of wood, carpenter, takstan, maker, master, workman, also Zend, tashtar, in Sanskrit, trashtar, master workman. I think the most rigid linguistic criticism ought to admit an original and direct relationship between the Aryan radicals ak and tak and the Akkadian terms ak and tak, together with the derived forms respectively appertaining to them. The simple element ak, whatever its origin, seems to constitute the essential base of all. We proceed to point out briefly some of the more obvious connections existing between the two groups of words. First, we have the name tashtar, varied to trashtar, the form takstar being primary to both, with the signification of master workman common to all. The radical element is tak, to hew, to make, phonetically identical with the Akkadian tak, stone, in which the syllable ak, to make, to build, to create, is obviously involved. But Ak is the monogram for the god Nabu, Egyptian Thoth, whose cosmical character has already been established. It is remarkable that Tashtar is likewise recognized as creator or a cosmical divinity in Aryan mythology. It is impossible not to see here a primitive connection between Tashtar and the Babylonian and Egyptian Mercury in the character of worker, builder, creator, and especially of cosmical agent. The Aryan Akhten, 8, to be compared with the paleographic symbols, namely the Akkadian Ak, Egyptian Sassoon, and Chinese Quaz, in all of which the notion of 8 and a distinct reference to the work of the creation are to be regarded as fundamental. We have shown that the material basis of the conception of 8, as denoted by the term Akhten, was an 8-cornered stone, dressed in the form of a cube, significant type of construction in general, and especially the fabrication of the world by the great master builder. The form Akhman stone, symbol also of heaven, is of special importance. The corresponding Greek form Akhman constitutes the title of Uranus, heaven, but it signifies likewise an anvil, and is the name of one of the chief Cabiriac divinities. It is very singular and seemingly inexplicable circumstance. It is a very singular and seemingly inexplicable circumstance that the same Aryan term should signify a stone, then heaven, then again anvil, finally being appropriated as the name of Cabirius. Nevertheless, the facts which we proceed to notice in some detail will tend not only to explain these apparent contradictions, but to afford a better standpoint for contemplating the various affiliations of ideas previously noticed. In the Phoenician mythology, the 8th son of Sadiq is called Eshmun, whose name signifies the 8th, and he was thus reckoned the 8th Cabirius in relation to the other sons of Sadiq. Eshmun represented heaven, that is, the heaven of fixed stars, regarded as the 8th celestial region in relation to the 7 planetary spheres assimilated to the 7 brothers of Eshmun. It is probable that the Phoenician Eshmun and the Aryan Akhman, with the softened formed Osman, were primitively put for the same conception, at least if they were not the same word, and they contribute much to explain each other. Eshmun represents heaven, and Akhman signifies heaven. Eshmun signifies the 8th, being put for the 8th celestial region, and Akhman, since it denotes heaven and is radically akin to Akhten, 8, evidently referred to the same celestial region. Again, Akhman denotes a stone as well as heaven, in which case it is evident the stone is a symbol of heaven, but a rough unhewn stone would never be taken as such a symbol. Hence, it is almost necessary to conceive here an 8-cornered stone, a cube. Finally, we know that Eshmun was a title of the 8th Cabirius, and that the Greek Akhman was actually the name of a Cabiriac deity. It is thus quite certain that this Greek Cabirius was the 8th, and that the ancient form Akhman had a similar reference. It is impossible not to admit the common origin of these various conceptions, and their primary reference to the cubical stone as symbol of the 8th region of heaven. But the Greek form means also an anvil. This may be explained by the fact that the first anvils were meteoric stones, or masses of iron that had fallen from heaven, and Lenormand shows that the first workers in this metal employed the meteoric iron, and not that produced from ores, and the Greek for iron, sideros, is related to the Latin sidus, sideris, a star. We thus account readily and probably correctly for the transfer of the Aryan Akhman, a stone, to signify a meteoric stone and thence an anvil. But does this prove that Akhman originally designated a meteoric stone? I think not, but this is an important inquiry to now be considered. In the first place, then, it is only under the Greek form and only in the Greek language, if my impression is correct, that this Aryan term ever signifies an anvil, and this appears to be therefore the only reason for supposing that it denoted primarily a meteoric stone, a reason quite insufficient. Secondly, all the analogies derived from its root ak and its cognate terms, such as akra, akri, especially akten, tend to the conclusion that the ordinary stone was originally intended. Finally, we are to consider here that an enclosed cubical space like the stone dressed in this form usually represents heaven in ancient architecture. The superior sanctuary of the Temple of Borsippa, dedicated to Mercury and forming the 8th stage, was in the form of a cube, as represented in the cut in Reverend Mr. Rawlinson's I'm assuming that means Reverend. Maybe that means something else. I don't know. They love their little acronyms and titles and shit. Mr. Rawlinson's new version of Herodotus. As the other stages symbolize the 7 planetary spheres, the superior or 8th stage must be taken for the 8th celestial region, the heaven of fixed stars, corresponding to that which Eshmin was assimilated. The Holy of Holies in the Hebrew tabernacle was in the form of a cube and was put for the heaven, as will appear in a future study. The stone, therefore, to which the term Achman referred was evidently a dressed stone with 8 angles, and it is quite certain that no meteoric stone had been given this form for the purpose of serving as such symbol. As Achman put for the anvil was the name of a Cabirius whose symbol was the anvil, so Achman, denoting a dressed stone, was evidently the name of a Cabirius who had such stone for his symbol. This personage must have been conceived as the stone par excellence, and in both instances the symbol related to the 8th celestial region, being that to which the Phoenician Eshman was assimilated, a name which is probably only a Semitized form of Achman. The Cabiri were evidently associated with this symbol, whether as denoting the cubical stone or the anvil, and it follows that the Cabiriac fraternity were originally workers in stone instead of in iron and the metals generally. This is the point to which we have wished to conduct the reader by the most rigid analysis of the facts and ideas constituting the data before us. So, stonemasons, huh? The steps by which we have arrived at this result may be restated briefly as follows. He says briefly, but okay. I'm going to read this last bit. The Aryan term Achman designated primitively a stone. At the same time, and under its Greek form Achman, it was appropriated as the name of one of the Cabiri. Under this Greek form, it denotes also the anvil, symbol of the Cabiris thus called. Everything indicates that the anvil was at first a meteoric stone, and it is thus easy to explain the transfer of the term Achman from a stone to an anvil. All depends now upon the question whether Achman designated primitively the meteoric stone as a symbol of heaven, or a stone having the ordinary composition of this class of materials. If the meteoric stone was the primitive conception involved in the term, then the Cabiri were workers originally in metal, the meteoric iron being one of them, but the indications are very strong, and I presume it could be fully demonstrated that Achman's stone meant primitively a stone of the ordinary composition. But a rough unhewn stone being similar to all others and quite ordinary would never be selected as a symbol of heaven, and since the cube was usually taken to represent the heaven of the fixed stars, it is safe to infer that a dressed stone having a cubical form was literally that which designated primitively by the word Achman, in its double sense of stone and heaven. This supposition fully explains the origin of the notion of 8, evidently 8 corners or angles, involved in the term octen, and it would be impossible to offer any other rational explanation of such origin. The simple existence of a stone thus wrought with which were connected symbolical ideas of the nature already indicated presupposes the existence also of a regularly organized craft of workers in stone, for among laborers promiscuously associated no such ideas would be likely to prevail. This organized craft could be no other than the Cabiriac fraternity, and the evidences tend to show that the very term Achman was the name of a Cabirus. Recall here the Greek form Achman, title of a Cabiriac divinity, and the Phoenician Eshman, a term obviously related to Achman and its softened form Osman, a form which also appropriated as the same of the Cabirius who represented heaven, the same region otherwise denoted by the 2 forms of the Aryan word. We must conclude, then, that the Cabiri were originally workers in stone, that is, such exclusively. They belonged to the period before the discovery of the art of working metals, that is to say the Stone Age. Subsequently, they became workers in metals likewise, when the Aryan word primitively denoting a dressed stone with 8 corners was transferred to a meteoric stone used by an anvil. But a dressed stone, with notions of a symbolical and sacred character connected with it, supposes a sacred edifice, a temple, for which it is designed as material for construction. The Cabiri were thus originally an organized temple craft, and the symbolical conceptions connected with the material thus wrought and employed by them presuppose the existence of certain esoteric ideas peculiar to their organization. In a word, it is necessary to admit here the existence of a traditional doctrine of the templum. The statement last made must be considered as immensely important, if it is to be admitted as correct. The data upon which we have proceeded thus far do not appertain to the later epochs of antiquity, but to the very earliest periods, even in the night of ages, when the light of the most primitive civilizations known to us was just dawning upon the world. If then we show the existence of a regularly organized priest class in whom the civil and sacerdotal functions were united, if we show that this organization was in fact a temple craft, including within itself different grades from the priest king, the sublime master, to the superintendent of constructions, and even the hewer of stone and maker of brick, if we show finally that certain esoteric ideas peculiar to this craft and relating to constructions of a sacred character had been handed down, amounting in fact to a traditional doctrine of the templum, the importance of such facts once fully verified cannot be overestimated. Of course, it is to be expected that statements of such a nature will be received with extreme hesitation, because people are retarded, and my efforts will be to place the matter in the clearest possible light. We have introduced already some proofs of a nature quite conclusive that the Cabiri as an organized priest class, or the chief constructors of the Pyramid of Borsippa, usually identified by cuneiform scholars with the original Tower of Babel. In addition to these proofs, it will be regarded as significant if we find that the Cabiric worship was actually connected with this very structure. In his account of the repairs of the Pyramid of Borsippa, which had been left in an unfinished state, Nebuchadnezzar says that he completed it to the top according to the original design. The restoration of it, as represented by Reverend G. Rawlinson, already cited on this point, shows 7 stages retreating one upon the other, whose different colors are interpreted by Assyrian logos as denoting the 7 planets. Above all, constituting the 8th stage was the sanctuary of a cubical form, and this was dedicated especially to Nabu, or Mercury, right? And see, this is what I'm talking about. It's to think that all of this is coincidental with all of the things that I had covered. You know what I mean? This is the underlying tradition, and that's why I've been so attracted to this character associated with that star that I talk so often about, right? Because like I said, I use astrology and that's why I was so attracted to all of this information, because every year around my birthday, the sun aligns with Antares. That's why I started looking at Antares so heavily the way that I did. Okay? What are the fucking chances, you know what I mean, of having a father and grandfather who are both named Camillo, which is descended directly from Latin Camillus, right? Derived directly from Latin Camillus, as the Romans, attended at religious ceremony, helper to the priests, right? The name Camillus has been connected with the Cadmillus or Casmillus of the Samothracian mysteries, identified with Hermes. What are the fucking chances of that? Of being born when the sun aligns with Antares, which is directly connected with Nesu and Nabu and all of this shit, with having a father and grandfather that are named specifically after the Samothracian mysteries, identified with Hermes, right? With the Cabiriac that I'm talking about, who's connected with Nabu, right? What are the chances of it? And it just goes on and on, dude. It just goes on and on. The exact agreement and conception to this 8th stage represented obviously the heaven of the fixed stars, with the character of the Phoenician Eshmen assimilated to the 8th celestial region. What I'm saying is that there's no way that all of this is coincidental. You see what I'm getting at here? This conjecture, indication of the connection of the Kabiri with this temple structure. This conjecture is confirmed by the fact that Mercury himself, to whom the superior sanctuary was dedicated, was reckoned as one of the Kabiri divinities. Dr. Movers and Jacinius have shown that Mercury, or Hermes, under the name Cadmilus and Casmilus, was included among the Cabiriac deities adored at Samothrace, whose mysteries were so celebrated in antiquity. But the indications are even more positive, and I've already read this stuff before, so yeah, like, this stuff's real. I don't really know how to explain it, but alright, hopefully that provides some background on the Freemasonic mysteries and their ranking structures and degrees and some of the meanings behind it.